I never liked digital files named too neatly. There's something sterile about a clean underscore and a version number as if order can keep things from unraveling. Seating plan, annual board dinner. PDF was one of those. No message, just an attachment forwarded from Nancy. Her email was brief, a single line. Thought you might want to see this. She didn't sign her name. She didn't need to. I opened it out of habit, not curiosity. I'd received many charts like this over the years, tables arranged by influence hierarchy, masked as courtesy. But this time, I wasn't listed. Not in the guest column, not in the notes. Nowhere. The screen glowed cold against my lap. Table 1 Founder's Legacy. The place where for 3 decades Walter and I sat side by side. Now only his name. In honor of Walter Whitlow. In bold serif. Centered. No mention of the other founder. Not even a footnote. The seat beside him had been assigned to Claire, current executive advisor, it said beneath her name. Not my son. Not me. Claire. I folded the laptop shut. It didn't make a sound, but the room felt smaller after. I watched my own hands for a moment. One of them still wore the thin gold band we chose in 1972. The other had a faint tremor that came and went with certain kinds of silence. There was no formal disinvitation, of course. That would have been too obvious. Instead, a text from Thomas sent 3 weeks earlier, which I hadn't deleted, but hadn't read again until now. Mom, these events are more about image now. You don't have to come if it's too much. No greeting, no sign-off. Just the surgical efficiency of a message crafted not to start a fight, but to end an expectation. I remembered the year we started holding these dinners. Walter insisted on the long table. Said round tables made people think they had equal say. He didn't mean it cruelly. He just liked knowing where the center was. At the time, I laughed. It's still a dinner, I told him. He looked over his reading glasses and said, "Not for everyone." Thomas was 11 then. He spilled cranberry sauce on his tie and cried under the buffet. I was the one who took him home early. Walter stayed and closed the deals. Now Thomas sits at the head of that same table, and I'm the one off the chart. There had been small warnings. Claire, referring to the Austin office as our flagship, as though I'd never spent nights there alone with payroll sheets and burnt coffee. The board photo that replaced mine with a sepia portrait of Walter, cropped from our wedding reception. Still, I hadn't expected deletion. A week ago, Emily Patterson, one of the youngest interns I ever mentored, called me Ms. Whitlow on LinkedIn and asked if she could list me as a reference. I said yes. I even wished her well. But afterward, I sat at the dining room table and stared at the framed photo of Walter in his gray suit and blue tie, the one they used in the memorial issue. No one had asked me for a quote. I'd given them years, decades. Everything from shareholder memos to emergency childcare when Claire couldn't leave the retreat. I remembered making her tea when she had morning sickness, driving her to appointments when Thomas had back-to-back meetings. She used to call me Mrs. Whitlow back then, like she wasn't sure where I fit. Apparently, she figured it out. I thought about replying to the text. A simple "I understand," maybe. But the words wouldn't come. Not from pride, just absence. When something is emptied enough times, even the echo gives up. Walter used to say, "Legacy is who remembers your work once they stop remembering your name." I never liked that sentence. Now I wonder if he meant it as a warning. On the counter there was a smudge of old coffee near the sink. I hadn't noticed it until that moment. I wiped it away with the sleeve of my sweater. It left a faint, wet shape that evaporated before I could really see it. Small things vanish like that. Slowly, without ceremony. The kitchen clock clicked past the hour. Somewhere in another house, probably Edward's, they were arranging flower orders, confirming wine pairings. There'd be toasts, Claire would smile without showing her teeth, and Thomas would say something about carrying the torch, the same phrase Walter used when he handed him the first set of keys to the company car. I remember polishing that car the night before. I remember not being invited for the photograph the next morning. There are some absences that only become visible when someone else fills your place without asking. The laptop was still warm when I picked it up again. I reopened the chart one more time and zoomed in on the table schematic. There it was. Table 2 near the back. Labeled Extended Family. 4 names I barely recognized. One had +1 TBD beside it. They had room for uncertainty, but not for me. That made me laugh. Quietly, to myself. It didn't last long. I looked down at the ring on my finger. A scratch ran through the underside of the band. I'd gotten it caught once in the hinge of a supply cabinet the week before the company's first expansion. Walter didn't notice. I never got it polished. In that moment, I didn't feel erased. Just shelved. Like an old ledger, correct essential, but no longer referred to. I didn't reply to the text. I didn't forward the seating chart. I didn't tell anyone that the name missing from the document had been the one that signed the company into existence. Instead, I closed the file, poured myself a glass of water, and sat by the window, where the light fell evenly across the hardwood. The chair creaked when I leaned back. No one heard it. Some omissions echo louder than insults, and some chairs stay empty long after the dinner ends. I learned early that silence is often mistaken for agreement. Or perhaps it's more comfortable to believe that someone quiet must be content. At the first meeting, where Thomas joined the quarterly strategy session, Walter handed him the floor before the coffee cooled. Thomas spoke too fast, and knocked over a tumbler with his elbow. No one commented. I handed him a paper towel and nodded when he glanced at me uncertain. After that, it became routine. He spoke. I listened. It wasn't a strategy, just a rhythm that hardened over time. I used to bring lemon bars to those meetings. I stopped once they hired catering. Claire once told me during a late spring luncheon that I had a softness about numbers. The phrase was casual, like a compliment that never quite lands. She offered it while adjusting her linen blazer, watching the servers from the corner of her eye. I didn't respond. I passed her the cream instead. Her cup was half full, but she took it anyway. When they started drafting the restructuring plan, I was invited to the first few calls more as a gesture than a request for input. The deck arrived in a shared folder. 79 slides. I made notes in the margins with a fine blue pen. Questions, cautions, one long arrow that curved around a block of optimistic projections. None of it came up in the next call. Thomas thanked Claire for streamlining the legacy model. Claire looked at the camera and smiled, just a flicker. My microphone stayed off. One morning, before the decision was finalized, Walter and I sat on the back porch. The grass was still wet. He sipped from his chipped mug and said quietly, "They need the room to get it wrong." I remember I nodded. That was all. No corrections. No reminders of what it took to build the thing they were about to gut. There's a framed photo in the second-floor conference room. Walter and Thomas stand beside a ribbon. Both hold scissors. I'm behind them, slightly out of focus. The plaque reads, "Opening Day, Whitlow Expansion." I remember that day. I was holding the ledger book. It didn't make the frame. When Claire suggested I consider a more ceremonial role, I didn't object. We were in the garden. She had come over under the pretense of returning a scarf. It was folded too perfectly. She picked at the edge of a rosemary bush and said, "You've given so much, but maybe it's time to let the young people take the reins." I smiled and offered her iced tea. It had too much lemon, but she drank it anyway. I said yes to almost everything that didn't ask for me. I said yes to hosting birthdays, to signing checks, to stepping out of photographs with a gentle wave. I said yes when Thomas asked for $200,000 for a tech startup. He said he had a friend from college who was developing an app. I didn't understand what it did, and he couldn't quite explain it, but the pitch deck had logos and buzzwords. Walter hesitated. I didn't. I wrote the check. When it failed, I baked a pie and left it on their porch. Claire returned the dish a week later. She didn't mention the filling. That year during the investor holiday party, Thomas stood up and thanked the next generation of innovators. He made a joke about Walter still using paper ledgers. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. My hands were in my lap. I think I was holding a paper napkin with a smudge of lipstick on the corner. I remember one Christmas when Edward Walter's brother pulled me aside and asked, "Do you ever miss being in charge?" I looked at him, not confused, but unsure what he meant. I never thought I'd left. Just moved to the edge where I could still see the whole picture. There were times I considered saying more. Once, when the new marketing rollout used the slogan, "Founded by visionaries driven by now." I noticed that visionaries was plural. I noticed there was only one name on the website. I remember showing the draft to Nancy in the kitchen. She read it, nodded, and folded it back up. "They're going fast," she murmured. Then she looked at me like she had more to say, but didn't. That was the year I stopped attending the spring retreats. The garden became my answer to most things. If I kept my hands in the soil, no one could ask for them elsewhere. I trimmed the roses, divided the lilies, let the lavender stretch too far. Claire said the yard looked organic. I let that word hang in the air like a compliment that didn't need to be unpacked. There's a blouse in my closet with a loose button. I bought it for a shareholders' dinner that I wasn't asked to speak at. The thread pulled the first time I wore it. I meant to sew it back, but never did. Now it hangs at the back, still clean, still waiting for a needle I never bothered to thread. Walter once told me after a rough quarterly meeting, sometimes being quiet is the only way to stay in the room. I think he meant it as comfort. It stayed with me anyway. I didn't think of myself as passive. I thought I was accommodating, useful, a ballast. No one argued with me, and I took that as a form of approval. But somewhere between the meetings I wasn't invited to and the roles I was thanked for stepping aside from, I started to become a backdrop. Familiar, expected motionless. That was the part I chose. I chose to be agreeable. I chose not to push. I chose to let the next generation try. I thought they would remember who had made the floor solid enough for them to stand. I thought yes was enough. It wasn't. I used to keep every card, even the ones with glitter that fell off in the drawer, even the ones where the ink smudged because someone wrote too quickly. I stopped a few years ago. Now I keep only the envelopes. They take up less space and tell the same story. The last one arrived on a Tuesday. A pale blue envelope, no return address, just to Grandma in the center. The handwriting could have been Claire's, or it could have been the assistant she hired last fall. Inside, a photo of the children. No note. Not even a signature. The card said, "Hope your day is special." I placed it next to the others in the kitchen drawer, top, right beneath the extra batteries, and the measuring tape I haven't used since Walter refinished the porch. There was a time Thomas wrote full sentences. In 5th grade, he gave me a card folded from construction paper covered in stickers and spelling errors. It said, "Thank you for teaching me how to finish things." I kept that one longer than most. I'm not sure where it is now. Maybe under the bed, maybe gone. The year he was named CEO, there was a reception in the conference hall. Claire wore a white sheath dress and spoke into the microphone with one hand resting on Thomas's arm. "We're standing here because of vision," she said, "because of forward thinking and new leadership." I stood in the back next to the catering table. No one asked me to speak. No one looked my way. I folded my napkin twice and watched the corners of the room where the light didn't quite reach. That morning I had ironed his shirt myself. Not because he asked, just because I always had. Claire smiled when she stepped down from the podium. Someone called her the new face of the company. I heard it clearly, even over the clink of glasses. Thomas nodded, didn't correct them. I think he adjusted his cufflink, the one I gave him on his graduation day. No one mentioned the night I stayed up, helping him draft his college essay, the one about legacy and responsibility. He had trouble with the conclusion. I wrote it on a sticky note and left it beside his pillow. The next morning, he turned it in with my words still attached. At his wedding, I wore a navy dress I hadn't worn before. The seating chart listed me as Mrs. Whitlow, family. I was placed near the hallway, close enough to hear the waitstaff setting up dessert trays. Claire was introduced as a leader in her own right, a woman with vision and grace. The applause lasted longer than the vows. There was a small bouquet in the center of each table, white chrysanthemums tightly bunched, no greenery. Walter used to bring me those on my birthday sometimes, just one stem. He said they looked clean. I always thought they looked quiet. On the wedding tables, the arrangement sat in glass cubes, polished and identical. At my table, one petal had already fallen onto the cloth when I arrived. There was no chair beside mine. 5 years ago, during a quarterly meeting, I shared a suggestion about streamlining vendor contracts. I had spent 3 days reviewing the supply chain reports. Claire tilted her head before I finished, and her voice followed quickly. That's interesting. But I think what Thomas meant to say is... I closed my notebook after that. No one asked why. When Claire sent out the official company calendar the following quarter, my birthday was listed as Legacy Founder Appreciation Day. It was marked in beige. I didn't attend. I mailed a check when the eldest grandchild was accepted into university, a quiet school in New England. I chose the amount carefully, not showy, not symbolic, just useful. I included a short letter about the cafeteria there, how they used to serve lemon pie on Thursdays. I learned that from a former client whose son had gone there. I never received a reply. 2 months later, during a holiday gathering, Claire mentioned the donation aloud across the room. "Mom's very generous," she said, not looking at me. "We'll make sure it's applied to something meaningful." Then she lifted her glass and turned to speak to someone else. I noticed Thomas checked his phone during the toast. "I've stopped asking how the children are doing. They send school photos each year. The frames don't match, and the pictures arrive without dates. One year, 2 photos came at once. One of them had the wrong grade level written on the back in pencil. Last spring, I ran into Nancy outside the florist. She was holding lilies. She looked surprised to see me and asked how I'd been. I said I was keeping busy, though I didn't mention with what. She leaned in, touched my arm lightly, and said, "I hope they still see you." I wasn't sure who she meant. In the hallway upstairs, there's a small wooden shelf. It holds a ceramic bowl chipped at the edge filled with loose buttons and earring backs. There's a ribbon from a charity gala tucked beneath it. The program from Thomas's high school graduation is folded beside it, stained faintly at the edge with something I can't identify. Maybe tea, maybe age. I looked at that shelf the other day, wondering why I hadn't cleared it. I didn't move anything. I just stared until the silence shifted. Not louder, just heavier. At one point, I thought memory was made of sharp things, moments that pierced words that branded. I was wrong. It's the soft ones that linger, the missing names, the thank yous unsaid, the chrysanthemums that bloom without anyone noticing who planted them. I no longer expect to be mentioned. I no longer wait for a name. There's a particular weight to things handed to you without question. A pen, a folder, a decision. They arrived without calling ahead. I heard the car door close, then the sound of footsteps that didn't hesitate. Claire knocked once sharp and practiced. She held the folder close to her chest, like it might wander off if she didn't. Thomas didn't look at me when I opened the door. He stepped past me as if I'd been in the way of something scheduled. The folder matched her shoes, a soft gray stitched at the edge, the kind given out at conferences where people wear lanyards with their names in bold. She placed it on the kitchen table, aligning it carefully with the wood grain. "Just a bit of legal cleanup," Claire said. "Things your husband would have wanted in place." Thomas stood behind her, arms crossed, fingers tapping once against his sleeve. I recognized the rhythm. Walter used to do that when he was trying not to show impatience. I pulled out a chair without speaking. The folder made a soft hiss as I opened it. The pages were crisp. Ink still smelled faintly fresh. The company name appeared at the top in block letters. Below that, the word transfer. I flipped slowly. The pages didn't resist. Neither did I. By the 5th page, it was clear the sale had gone through. The ink wasn't waiting for me, it was already dry. I was simply there to acknowledge that I'd been informed. Not consulted, not advised, not even warned. Thomas cleared his throat, a quiet thing, but loud in the kitchen. "It's not about pushing you out," he said. "You're not part of the day-to-day anymore. We're just moving forward, that's all." Claire didn't look up. She pointed to a signature block near the bottom. "There's a condo in Brookhaven we've set aside for you. Smaller, more manageable. You'll be comfortable." I traced a corner of the page with my thumb. The edge bent slightly under the pressure. I remembered once watching Walter fold an envelope perfectly in half before slipping a check inside. He said clean lines gave dignity to uncomfortable things. Claire's hand rested on the table now, palm down. Her nails were smooth pale, one chipped. "We've made sure you won't have to worry about upkeep, or taxes, or the board. It's a fresh start." The phrase hung for a moment. Not fresh for me, I thought, but clean for them. Thomas shifted his weight. "This is what Dad would have wanted," he said. "He always said you deserved rest." I closed the folder, not abruptly, just enough for the paper to meet paper. Then Claire, too, quickly said, "We'll be flying to Milan next week, just a few days to celebrate the signing." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "It's a business retreat." Milan. The word didn't echo. It just sat there, flat and dry. I stood and walked to the counter, not because I needed to, but because my hands required somewhere to go. I reached for the mug I use for measuring flour. The handle was chipped on the underside. I touched the brake, then let go. Claire stood too. "We wanted you to hear it from us." I didn't respond. Thomas exhaled through his nose. He used to do that when he lost board games as a child. Small losses always weighed more than he expected. "I thought you'd be relieved," he said. "This way you don't have to deal with the stress anymore." Stress. That was the word he used when I stayed late to check end-of-year reports. When I reminded him that marketing projections didn't match quarterly numbers. When I asked him to review contracts instead of relying on Claire's summaries. Claire adjusted her blazer. "You've done so much. Now you can focus on yourself. Your garden. The house." They didn't notice that I hadn't mentioned the garden in over a year, or that I hadn't sat in the sunroom since Walter passed. Thomas placed a pen beside the folder. "Just need your signature, then everything's finalized." I looked at the pen. It was new, smooth and heavy. A promotional one, maybe. It had a logo I didn't recognize. There was a time he used my old fountain pen for every formal document. He said it made things feel real. No one mentioned the trust Walter and I had drawn up together. No one asked if I had reviewed the holdings. No one considered that comfort for me was never the same as quiet. Claire glanced at her watch. I picked up the pen. It was balanced. Unremarkable. I signed where they indicated. One page, then another. The ink left no pause. Thomas gathered the folder like it belonged to him. Claire murmured something about logistics. I didn't catch the words. They didn't wait for a thank you. At the door, Thomas turned briefly. "It's better this way," he said. "We're just trying to help." I didn't answer. He hesitated, then left. The door closed with a soft click. On the table, the pen remained. I looked at it untouched now and thought of the drawer in my desk that still held Walter's favorite mechanical pencil. He never let anyone else use it, not even Thomas. The folder was gone, but the shape of it lingered in the wood grain, a faint mark where paper had rested too long. Some decisions are made before you're asked to sign, and some signatures don't make anything official, they just make it quieter. There's a sound to absence when no one listens for it. I folded the tablecloth again, not because it needed folding, but because my hands hadn't yet remembered what to do when nothing else asked of them. The fabric still held a faint crease from where Claire had rested her elbows. The folder was gone. So was the pen. They took those with them, but left the silence behind, neatly ironed and hanging in the air like a coat no one bothered to claim. I hadn't walked them to the door. I hadn't even stood up from the chair after placing the envelope on the table, in case you ever need to understand the difference between ownership and value. That's all I offered. Thomas hadn't opened it. He'd tucked it under one arm with the same stiffness he used to hold report cards he knew Walter wouldn't be impressed with. He used to practice his tone in the mirror. It was a hard class. The curve was unfair. Everyone did badly. They didn't ask why I had the envelope ready. They assumed I always had things like that prepared. I used to. For birthdays, for staff anniversaries, for hospital flowers, for last-minute speeches no one remembered to write. The drawer where I kept the table linens still squeaked a small protest every time it opened. I never fixed it. Familiar friction has a way of reminding you what's real. I sat. The chair across from me was empty. The same chair Walter had always avoided because the leg wobbled slightly. He used to tap it twice before choosing the next one, muttering something about stability. Thomas now avoided it too, maybe out of instinct. Maybe imitation. My tea had gone cold. I reached for the ring I wore on my right hand. It had once belonged to Walter's mother. The stone was small, not valuable, but it clicked softly against the ceramic whenever I lifted a cup. Lately, that sound felt like punctuation, a quiet reminder that some things once simple had weight now. No one had raised their voice earlier. That would have been easier. Claire had kept her tone sweet, measured. Her eyes scanned the room the way people scan menus they've already memorized. You'll be comfortable. Smaller space, less burden. It's not like you're involved in operations anymore. You've had your time. Thomas had glanced at me like he expected me to argue, or plead, or break. I had done none of those. There was nothing left to explain. The key to the small wall safe was still warm from where I'd placed it in my palm earlier. I didn't rush. Nothing needed to be hurried now. The hinge was stiff, though I'd oiled it last spring. Inside papers were stacked in a manila folder with no labels. Walter had believed in discretion. I'd once teased him for using cash envelopes with no markings. Even your secrets are organized. The trust document had no surprises left for me. I'd memorized the line long ago. Beneficiary Rosemary Whitlow, 80%. Holding stake, non-transferable entity. Meridian Holdings Trust. Founded January 3, 2001. That date, the day Walter and I signed our final joint ownership restructure. He didn't tell Thomas. He didn't tell anyone. He just brought home a bottle of dry Riesling and set it on the counter with 2 glasses and a Post-it note. If they ever try to take what you built, don't fight them out loud. Just take the foundation and walk. The envelope I handed Thomas earlier had a copy of that Post-it, not the original. That was still tucked behind my spice rack, hidden between bay leaves and nutmeg. They would go to Milan. They would pose for photographs, shake hands with people who didn't know where the company began, who never saw the first sketch of the Whitlow logo drawn on a napkin in 1984 while Walter spilled chowder on his tie. I didn't plan to stop them. I had no interest in reclaiming a seat they no longer knew how to offer. The phone buzzed once in the living room. I didn't move. Likely a follow-up from Thomas or Claire or someone they'd told too soon. I reached instead for the dish towel I'd folded 3 times already. There was no need to leave the house today. No groceries, no appointments. Just the pages now resting again behind a locked door. The same pages that said, "You were never only a figurehead. You were the root." I thought of the chandelier Thomas had once wanted to replace in the foyer. "It's old-fashioned," he'd said. "Clients don't care about sentimental light fixtures." Walter had looked at him quiet, then replied, "It still works." The next day, Thomas dropped it. It cracked in 3 places. I glued it back myself. I stood then only to turn off the kettle that had never turned on. The silence was not uncomfortable. It wasn't loud. It simply didn't need to be filled. When the wind brushed against the glass panes near the door, I didn't look up. They would find out eventually. About the trust. About the holding company. About the piece they couldn't sign away, but they would find out quietly. Not from me. Not through confrontation. Not in words. There's a kind of stillness that isn't surrender. And I had chosen it. I didn't realize how quiet life could be without waiting. The house had no doorbell. I hadn't noticed that during the walkthrough. The agent had kept pointing out the natural light, the open shelving in the kitchen, the new insulation. No one mentioned the missing bell. That suited me. There were no arrivals I was waiting for, no footsteps I expected to echo up the drive. The front room had only 1 chair when I moved in. A small armchair with a faded cushion. I sat in it every morning, facing the window. The cushion had a rip along the seam, just big enough to see the yellow stuffing inside. I never fixed it. It reminded me that things don't have to be whole to be used. The bookshelf held only what I chose to bring. A copy of Leaves of Grass. A volume of accounting case studies from the late 90s. A cookbook with more notes in the margins than recipes. And a small wooden box that used to sit in the second drawer of my old desk, filled now with nothing but backup keys and a flash drive labeled simply "Yours." There were no pictures on the walls. I hadn't brought any. Not the wedding photo where my hand seemed to float awkwardly, unsure whether to rest on Walter's arm. Not the family portrait where Thomas stood a little closer to Claire than to me, though the photographer had gently motioned for balance. Not the canvas print from the company gala where my name had been misprinted in the program. I kept none of those. In the kitchen, a small mirror hung above the counter. Round, cheap, just glass and frame. I didn't buy it to reflect anything in particular, but the first morning I caught my own eyes in it. Barefaced, no jewelry hair still damp from the sink. It startled me how little of myself I recognized. No one called that day, or the next. I didn't check the phone more than once. The silence felt structured like a room with walls defined simple, not unfriendly. The tea I made tasted sharper than I remembered. Peppermint, no sugar. I learned to time the steeping just by scent. Some mornings I let the steam curl around my fingers before lifting the cup. A small kind of control. The email account I hadn't touched in years required 2 verifications. I reset the password to something no one else would guess. I wrote it down, then tore the paper into 4 pieces and flushed each one separately. Not because I feared theft, because I didn't want rescue. A message came through 3 days later from Barbara Winslow. Subject line checking in, if you're ready. Her words were brief. Direct. I left Whitlow 2 years ago. I'm working with Meridian now. You're missed. If you ever want to advise again, even just part-time, we'd be lucky. I didn't reply at first. I made another cup of tea. I reorganized the spice rack. I refolded towels. Then I typed 6 words I'm available. Mornings are best for me. She didn't ask why I left. She didn't mention Claire, or Thomas, or Milan. At the grocery store, I ran into a woman whose name I used to forget at staff functions. She used to compliment my scarves while checking her watch. Now she barely recognized me. "Oh, I didn't know you moved out this way." "Yes." "Retired or restructured?" She laughed, unsure. I didn't explain. In the backyard, the soil was loose enough to turn with my own hands. I planted white chrysanthemums along the fence. Not for memory, not for tradition, just because they bloom even when the sun retreats. One afternoon, a package arrived. No return label. Inside, a framed sketch of the original Whitlow headquarters drawn on tracing paper, the kind we used in planning meetings back when decisions were still made with pencils. At the bottom, in faint handwriting, I recognized immediately Draft 2. Rosemary's Adjustments. Better flow. I leaned it against the back of the shelf. Not on display, not hidden. Barbara called the next morning, just once. "We can use your eyes again, not your name, your eyes. All right. We'll send you the files." There was no mention of the board, no formal welcome, no handshakes or titles. Just spreadsheets, proposals, raw numbers. I opened the first folder and felt a part of my brain stretch again, like a limb that hadn't moved in too long. There was no pressure to be seen, only to see clearly. I no longer kept the television on for noise. I didn't fill silences with news anchors or weather reports. I learned the rhythm of the fridge's hum the exact moment the floor creaked under the window, the way tea leaves collect at the bottom of a white mug. One evening, I wiped the counter clean with the corner of my sleeve. Not because I had to, because it was smooth and I liked how the cotton felt against the tile. A notification blinked once on my phone group photo from Thomas's account. A charity dinner, Claire and Silver. A caption about legacy. I didn't open it. I let the screen dim on its own. The house doesn't echo. It holds sound gently. A kettle whistle here, a drawer closing. My own breath. There's a kind of peace that has no story. It just exists. And for now, that is enough. I used to answer every call on the first ring. There was a rhythm to it, a small thrill in being needed in the way my name would land on someone else's breath. I thought it meant something, but I've learned silence carries its own weight, and not all voices are worth disturbing it for. The phone started ringing again last Thursday. I let it buzz to the end. 4 times. Then it stopped. It rang again the next morning, earlier. I sat at the kitchen table, half watching the kettle. Steam rose thin and disciplined. When it rang a 3rd time, I picked up. "Mom, something's wrong with the primary accounts." I moved the mug slightly to the left. It left a faint circle, barely visible, but there. I didn't answer. "They're locked. I mean, I can't even see the statements." "Did you move them?" I traced the edge of the cup with one finger. "You signed everything over. You said you were stepping back." I could hear someone else breathing behind him, sharper clipped. "Claire. She told me you wouldn't. She said this wasn't personal." I let the silence stretch. Then, with the same voice I'd once used to remind him not to forget his jacket in 2nd grade, "You sold what you thought was the company. You never asked what parts were actually yours." There was a pause, paper rustling, voices in the background muffled but urgent. A name. William. Then Claire's voice raised and too bright. "This is elder abuse. What you're doing is malicious." The mug in my hand had a chip near the handle. I hadn't noticed it before. No, Claire, I said slowly. This is consequence. They didn't hang up immediately. There was scrambling and the sound of someone trying to switch the call to speaker. I pressed the red button gently and let the quiet fold over me again. The next day, an email arrived from William Crane. No greeting, no warmth. Just a forwarded message chain about halted payments, frozen assets, and flagged authorizations. I scrolled down without reading, then closed the window. At noon, the doorbell I never installed stayed silent. A letter followed, couriered, not mailed. Stamped urgent, though the envelope had no weight to it. I left it unopened on the counter next to a bundle of mint. The herbs needed trimming. I reached for the scissors. In the afternoon, another call. I just want to understand Thomas's voice, hoarse. If we've done something, if I did. The faucet dripped once, then stopped. I waited. We can fix this. I'll fix it. I'll tell Claire to back off. I'll restructure the board. We can restore your title if that's what you want. A breath. Please, I can't even get a credit line right now. I looked at the calendar on the wall. I hadn't flipped it since last month. You told me I was holding you back, I said. I took that seriously. His voice caught, and I thought I heard him begin to speak again. I ended the call. Barbara sent a text later that evening. Just a line. They'll come crawling, but not for the reasons you deserve. I didn't reply. Instead, I pulled out the chair by the window and sat with my legs folded under me. The tea had cooled. I drank it anyway. On Saturday, Claire tried again. This time her tone was rehearsed, almost cheerful. We should talk, as women, as family. She waited for an opening and when none came, filled the space herself. You've made your point. Fine. But the press is starting to notice. It's bad optics for all of us. I placed the receiver down on the table and let her voice continue without me. Later, I pressed play on the answering machine. You're being unreasonable. Click. People are laughing at us. Click. You'll die alone in that cabin and no one will know. Click. None of it surprised me. What stood out was what wasn't said. Not once we miss you. Not once come home. Not once we were wrong. I lit a candle that night, not for any ritual, just to see how long it would burn without flickering. In the drawer where I kept my documents, there was still the original folder. I hadn't opened it since the day I moved here. The papers inside were crisp, untouched. My signature at the bottom of each page looked calm. Final. I had written a note once, long before all of this began. Folded it into a bank envelope just in case. I reread it now. 7 words in my own handwriting, you won't know you needed me until... No punctuation, just that. I placed it back where it was. The chrysanthemums by the fence had started to tilt. I tied them upright gently with twine from the back shed. Small acts of care for things that would never speak. I haven't blocked the numbers. I don't need to. Some silences are louder than rejection. When the phone rings now, I glance at it once. Then I return to the kettle, or the thread in my hand, or the chair where the cushion still sags just slightly. I'm not waiting anymore. I've already been answered. I never liked hearing my name out loud unless I chose when and how it was used. The sound of it now, simple, unadorned, untethered, lands differently in a room than it used to. Once it was said with the expectation of silence following. Now it invites response. Emily prints my name on the placard beside hers in a soft gray font, R. Whitlow, advisory consultant. She doesn't ask if I prefer something else. I leave it as is. Every morning begins with the same loop. A short walk down the block, shoes low to the ground. I pass a mailbox someone forgot to repaint. A man in his 60s always nods as I cross the street. He never asks my name. The coffee shop is never crowded. I order the same tea, no sugar, no fanfare. At the back table, light pools near the leg of the chair across from me. I sit where the light doesn't reach. This morning, an article on the second page of the paper mentioned Phoenix Axis. Not by name, not directly. Just legacy corporations struggle under generational shifts in governance. I folded the paper into fourths, then smaller. It stayed in my coat pocket beside an old brass key I no longer need. Emily forwarded an invite to the weekly finance sync. Zoom link, shared agenda, action notes in the body of the email, all lowercase. She always writes my name in the greeting. Never mom, never ma'am, just hi, Rosemary. She asked yesterday after a meeting about restructuring onboarding sequences. Did your family know you were this brilliant? I kept typing. Then they knew what they wanted to know. The rest I kept safe. She didn't follow up, just smiled, then reached for the charger. There's a photo on my desk now slightly off-center. I printed it on matte paper. No frame. It's me captured mid-sentence at the Meridian Symposium. One hand raised, half a smile, eyes not looking at the camera. The room behind me slightly blurred. It sits where the wedding portrait used to. Next to it, a small ceramic bowl chipped at the edge holding paper clips. I remember Claire once telling me, "Too many paper clips on a desk makes you look scattered." I didn't reply then. I just swept the bowl off the table. Now I refill it weekly, one clip at a time. The garden needed trimming last weekend. The white chrysanthemums had overgrown in a quiet sprawl. I took my time, gloves soft, with soil trimming from the base. No one asked why I planted them. No one moved them to decorate a table without knowing their weight. I keep the trimmings on the sill in a glass jar. No arrangement. No symmetry. The financial software was harder to learn than I admitted. But the moment I ran my first quarterly summary and saw the chart rise on my own terms, something shifted. I didn't celebrate. I just printed it out and filed it in a binder labeled W. Not Whitlow, just W. There's a new routine to my afternoons. Reply to the partners in Stuttgart. Review the draft contracts from the patent team. Decline 3 podcast interviews. Read 1 paragraph of a novel twice, then set it down. One evening last week, Thomas called again. I didn't answer. The voicemail was short. Hope you're doing okay. I miss you. No apology. No context. Just enough words to fill 30 seconds and disappear. I played it once, then deleted it. The mail comes at noon. Today, there was a card from a neighbor inviting me to a community garden project. It was signed from the bench crew with a smiley face drawn under the names. No one asked what I used to be. Emily sent a follow-up after the board review. You held the room like it owed you something. I almost replied, then closed the laptop. Before dinner, I checked the lockbox I keep in the second drawer. The original trust documents are still there, unchanged, quiet, untouched by their hands. I didn't move them for security. I moved them because I wanted the drawer to feel heavy when I opened it. Weight as memory. There's a hairline crack on the mug I use most. It runs near the base, barely visible unless you tip it just so. I keep using it. I don't keep pictures of my children here. That decision came quietly. Not out of bitterness, but necessity. Their absence created space I didn't know I needed. No photo, no card, no voice message from them makes its way into this place anymore. I let that be the boundary. Barbara visited once. She noticed the photo of me on the desk and touched the corner of the print. Took you long enough. I didn't respond. Some affirmations don't require reciprocation. There's still silence in the evenings. But it's the kind that breathes, not the kind that waits. I used to measure love by the number of times someone remembered to include me. Now I measure it by the way I protect my own outline. That's the rewrite no one expected. There's a difference between closing something and locking it. I took the thick, beige envelope out from the drawer beside my desk. No name on the front. No return address. Just weight paper against paper, the kind that held itself still when placed flat. Inside a single page, my own handwriting. Each letter small and careful. The way I used to sign report cards for Thomas when he was still young enough to bring them home. No anger in the ink. No correction marks. Just a sentence followed by another. A different kind of silence this time. One I'd written into every space between the lines. You believed inheritance meant ownership. I believed it meant stewardship. What you tried to take, I already made safe, not from you, but for you. Now it's time for you to find your own way. With or without my name. No closing line. No signature. I folded the page into thirds like I'd done with statements, invoices, board minutes. Except this time, it wasn't for approval. It wasn't for permission. It was for memory. The walk to the mailbox was short. The flag had chipped paint. I slipped the envelope in and didn't look back. Later that afternoon, I logged into the Meridian Trust account. The passcode had been changed 2 months earlier, a mix of numbers I could finally remember without writing down my old address, Walter's badge number, the year I decided to stop waiting for gratitude. I opened the portfolio summary, tapped the transfer allocation tab. It took me to a line labeled Donor Reassignment. I selected 10%. A prompt recipient. I typed slowly, Walter Whitlow, Educational Endowment, Est, 1992. For the workers who made the foundation but never signed the marble walls. Then I clicked Submit. It didn't ask me to confirm. There was a box waiting in the garage, a plain cardboard one, not labeled, not recent. I filled it with the documents I used to check every quarter: the original shareholder agreement, the framed photo from the 25th anniversary gala, the fountain pen Claire once gave me for signing history. I dropped them in without sorting, then sealed the top with thick black tape and placed it on the shelf near the back, beside the rake under the empty jars I never used. I didn't burn it. Destruction never appealed to me. Just distance. Barbara called during dinner. I let it ring twice, then picked up. She didn't mention the board or Emily or the press cycle around the recent collapse of the Milan acquisition, only, "Are you breathing easier?" I stirred the tea. Then it's a different kind of quiet now. She didn't speak again. The call ended without noise. That night I sat by the kitchen window and watched the street lamp blink twice, then stay lit. I thought of the porch light outside Thomas's house, the one I'd installed the week after his wedding when he still called about every flicker in the circuit. I used to keep extra bulbs in the car, just in case. I hadn't driven down that street in years. A photo sat near the bookshelf, not framed, just propped up. A team from the factory in '86, faces without titles. Walter at the edge, not in the middle. No spotlight. Just hands dirty from work, eyes half squinting into a sun that wasn't staged. None of them were at the signing dinner in Milan. None of them were asked what the company meant to them. I remember one of them, Luis, handing me a folded napkin after a board meeting, whispering, "Mrs. Whitlow, you see things most folks pretend not to." He was laid off during restructuring in 2009. No ceremony. I kept the napkin for years. Used it to wrap a single marble from the office paperweight set. It's in the drawer now near the gardening gloves. The marble's cracked down the middle. When the email came from Thomas last week, the subject line read, "Closure." No greeting. Just a link to an article quoting him on hard lessons and the evolution of legacy. Claire was listed as co-architect of the rebuild. I didn't click the link. I clicked archive. The orchids near the sink have started to bloom again. It's their third time this year. I don't water them on a schedule. Just when the leaves curl ever so slightly. They don't need much, just room. At the bottom of my bookshelf sits a small tin box. Inside, 3 unused birthday cards. No names written. All from the same pack Thomas once brought home from a gas station just in case he said, "The envelopes are still sealed. I won't send them. The cards aren't blank." But they never said enough. I never wanted them to remember me as the founder, or the widow, or the mother who stayed quiet at the wrong times. Only this, that I had been there, fully, that when the decision came to stay or step away, I did not flinch, and I did not wait to be thanked. They will remember what they took. I will remember what I left untouched. Some stories don't need a final sentence, just a space left open so no one forgets who once filled it. I used to mistake stillness for absence. The kettle I placed on the stovetop had a chip on the handle smooth from time and heat. It wasn't the new kind with preset temperatures or automatic shutoff. It was cast iron heavy with a lid that needed to be coaxed into place. Walter used it the morning we signed our first joint contract. He'd wiped steam from his glasses and joked about pouring boiling water over risk-not spreadsheets. That was before our names became weighted, before silence in a meeting meant weakness, before the house felt like a museum of relevance. I stood barefoot on the cool tile and waited for the sound to rise, not the sharp whistle, but the quiet sputter just before it. I liked that moment. It never announced itself too soon. The window creaked when I opened it. Air moved in without asking. It carried the scent of damp grass and white chrysanthemum, the kind that rarely held its petals long unless left untouched. I had planted 3 new roots weeks ago just beneath the ledge. One had begun to open. Not quickly, just enough. On the table, a notebook lay open, the kind with grid lines and a cloth spine. I had started it last fall. No business plans, no contingency maps, just names of seeds I might plant come spring. Lavender, milkweed, speckled beans I'd found in a catalog with no logo. I hadn't made up my mind about the lemon balm. There was a letter from Denver near the edge of the table. It had arrived 2 days ago, formal invitation panelist, name tag already printed, hotel room reserved. The folder was thick, as if the weight of it might convince me. I hadn't responded. The ceramic teapot, off-white with a faint crackle under the glaze, had belonged to Walter's mother. I filled it without ceremony. The lid didn't quite fit anymore, but it sat well enough. I let the mint leaves steep without a timer. Timing, I've learned, isn't about clocks. The package came late morning. A slim box wrapped in plain brown paper. No note except a post-it from Nancy Brooks. She'd found it while going through the archives at the old property. "I thought it should come back to you," it said in her rounded handwriting. Inside the worn leather notebook Walter used to carry everywhere. I hadn't seen it since the merger. On the second page in his uneven script, "Let her lead." She always knew where we were going, no date, no recipient, just words left where someone might find them one day. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. The words weren't new, only returned. The neighborhood was quiet that morning. No leaf blowers, no early deliveries. A boy on a bicycle passed once, not looking toward the house. I didn't expect him to. I hadn't become someone anyone pointed to anymore. That felt correct. I hadn't spoken to Thomas in months. Not since the envelope. Claire had sent an email weeks ago, subject line, "We're reflecting," but it remained unopened. Not out of defiance, just disinterest, reflection. I'd found doesn't always need an audience. My phone rang once that afternoon. Unknown number. I let it pass. The second ring didn't come. The chrysanthemums weren't fully in bloom yet. Their stems bent slightly in the wind, unsure. I didn't correct them. They would either straighten or they wouldn't. Life didn't always depend on intervention. I had stopped checking the news about the company. Barbara updated me when needed. Emily called once about an investor call, but we spoke more about composting than capital. At dinner, I sliced a pear and crumbled soft cheese over a single piece of toast. No place setting, no napkin folded for show, just the act of eating without apology. I used the knife with the wooden handle blunted but familiar. I liked its imperfection. On the wall near the door, a small painting hung. Not a portrait. Just brushstrokes, vague and warm. I'd found it at a flea market unsigned. It reminded me of nothing. That was why I liked it. No photos of Walter, none of Thomas, not even of myself. The only image was the reflection in the hallway mirror when I passed by with groceries. Not curated, not posed. Just enough light to say, here. I hadn't deleted the old family number. It stayed in my contacts like a ghost, untapped, harmless. It no longer buzzed on holidays. I no longer waited. Forgiveness wasn't something I granted. It was something I no longer required. I didn't carry their names in every breath. I didn't rehearse what I would say if they showed up. I didn't picture the doorbell. I no longer kept the porch light on just in case. I trimmed the plant near the windowsill, a brittle edge, a dead leaf. No ceremony. I swept the floor and folded a kitchen towel. The kettle was cool now. I poured what remained into a mug and let it sit. A blue jay landed on the fence outside. It didn't look toward me. I didn't wave. There are lives built around proving. Proving worth, proving strength, proving relevance. I had lived that once. Now there is just this. I brew my tea in the kettle he once held. I open windows to a garden that doesn't ask me for legacy. I let seeds sleep until they're ready. And I do not wait to be named in someone else's story. I used to think my value lived in what I created for others. Now I know value is what remains when nothing must be shown. And this morning, I poured tea, opened a window, and lived. That was enough.